January 1945. Somewhere in the Ardennes, an American patrol found a dead German soldier lying half buried in the snow. At first, nothing about him looked unusual. A gray field coat, a rifle belt, a steel helmet tilted sideways in the white crust beside his shoulder. Then one of the Americans looked down at his feet. Over the German's thin ankle boots, he was wearing American rubber overshoes. Not German issue. Not captured from a warehouse. Not supplied by any orderly chain of command. They had been taken from somewhere else. Maybe from a prisoner. Maybe from a corpse. Maybe from a frozen roadside where another man had already stopped needing them. The strangest thing was not that a soldier had stolen something in the middle of a winter battle. Soldiers have always stolen what keeps them alive. The strange thing was what he had stolen. Not a watch, not a pistol, not cigarettes. Boots. The army that had marched through Warsaw, Paris, and almost to Moscow was now fighting its last great offensive with men desperate enough to pull American footwear off the dead. And that one small detail told a colder truth than any battle map could show. Germany had built Tiger tanks. Germany had fired V-2 rockets. Germany had put jet fighters into the sky. But by the last winter of the war, Germany could no longer reliably put decent boots on the feet of the men expected to win it. The Americans had made terrible mistakes with footwear too. Their early service shoes had failed in mud, rain, mountains, and cold. Their soldiers suffered trench foot by the tens of thousands. In Italy, in the Hurtgen forest, and in the Bulge, American boots became part of a medical disaster that commanders could not ignore. But there was one difference. When the American boot failed, the American system changed the boot. When the German boot failed, the German soldier looked down and understood that nothing better was coming. That is why the story of the Second World War can be told from the ground up. Not from the turret of a tank, not from a general's map room, not from the cockpit of a fighter, from a pair of freezing feet. For the German army, the boot had once been a symbol of power. The Marschstiefel, the tall marching jackboot, was not just a piece of clothing. It was an idea made out of leather, a pull-on shaft rising high up the calf, a hobnailed sole that struck pavement with a hard metallic rhythm, a reinforced heel, heavy leather, no laces, no looseness, no individuality. When German infantry marched as one body, the sound of those boots on stone became part of the terror of occupation. The jackboot said discipline. It said order. It said that the man wearing it had disappeared into the machine, and in the first years of the war, the machine seemed unstoppable. In September 1939, German soldiers crossed into Poland wearing boots made from good leather by skilled German workshops. In June 1940, many of those same formations marched into Paris. The boot worked because the war still matched the assumptions behind it. European roads, short campaigns, captured stockpiles, a belief that victory would come before shortages mattered. But the jackboot carried its own hidden weakness. It consumed leather in huge quantities. Tall shafts consumed leather. Full linings consumed leather. Thick soles consumed leather. Repair consumed leather. Replacement consumed leather. And leather was exactly what Germany could not easily replace once Britain and the Allies closed the sea lanes around it. This is the part military mythology tends to skip. A boot does not begin at the front line. It begins with cattle, with hides, with tanning chemicals, with rubber, with stitching machines, with transport, with spare parts, with factories not yet bombed, with clerks who know which sizes are needed, with trains and trucks that can still reach the depot. A soldier sees a boot. A quartermaster sees a continent. By 1939, Germany had leather stockpiles, skilled craftsmen, and occupied territory to plunder. But it did not have an endless world market. It did not have safe oceans. It did not have a surplus economy behind the army. Every year the war lasted, the jackboot became less a symbol of strength and more a bill Germany could not pay. The first sign was almost invisible. The boot shaft was shortened to save leather. Then rear area troops stopped receiving jackboots. Then new recruits were issued low ankle boots with gaiters instead. By 1941, the famous tall boot was no longer the standard for every new German soldier. By late 1943, production of the traditional jackboot had effectively stopped. Think about what that means. The most recognizable symbol of German military power did not vanish because it became unfashionable. It vanished because the Reich could not afford the material that made the symbol possible. What came after was cheaper, smaller, and worse. Low boots, canvas gaiters, synthetic soles, reworked leather, rubber substitutes, wooden soles in some cases, materials that cracked, split, and wore through faster than any soldier could tolerate in a long campaign. German soldiers did not need an economic historian to explain the decline to them. They felt it every morning when they put on their boots. Then came Russia. Operation Barbarossa began in June 1941 with the same fantasy that had shaped the German boot system itself. A short war, victory before winter, a campaign decided by speed before logistics could become judgment. The German army drove east in summer clothing and standard leather footwear because the high command expected the Soviet Union to collapse before the cold arrived. It did not. By December, men who had marched hundreds of miles through dust and mud were standing outside Moscow in temperatures that plunged far below zero. Their boots froze hard overnight. Sweat froze inside the leather. Socks stiffened. Soles conducted cold straight into the feet. A man who pulled his boots off near a fire could find them too rigid to put back on again. The boot that had carried him toward Moscow became a trap around his own feet. The frostbite numbers were catastrophic. During the Battle of Moscow, roughly 130,000 frostbite cases were reported among German troops, with thousands of amputations. Across that winter, the Eastern Front produced cold injuries on a scale that ripped trained men out of the line without a Soviet bullet touching them. And the most humiliating proof came from the enemy. Soviet felt boots, the Valenki, looked primitive beside a polished German jackboot. Compressed wool, simple shape, little glamour, no parade ground authority. But in Russian winter, they kept feet alive. German soldiers traded for them, begged for them, stripped them from the dead. In some accounts, frozen corpses had to be hacked loose before the boots could be removed. That was not bad luck. That was a strategic assumption collapsing into flesh. A country that plans a short war can tolerate a boot built for a short war. A country trapped in a long war cannot. The American boot story began in almost the opposite way. The United States did not enter the war with a perfect infantry shoe. It entered with a bad one. The pre-war Type 1 service shoe was a russet leather low shoe built for a small peacetime army. It looked neat. It worked on bases. It could survive inspections. It was not ready for men standing for days in mountain mud. The Type 2 improved little. When American soldiers carried those shoes into North Africa and Italy, the ground exposed them. Sand cut through stitching. Wet rock defeated leather soles. Mud swallowed traction. Cold water seeped through every weak point. Then came the Italian winter of 1943 and 1944. American soldiers in the Fifth Army fought in rain, mud, snow, and freezing mountain foxholes with footwear that had not been built for that punishment. Their feet swelled, skin broke, circulation failed, tissue began to die. Trench foot, an old horror from the First World War, returned with a vengeance. In parts of the Italian campaign, cold and wet foot injuries became a massive share of total casualties. Among American troops, The rate was far worse than that of British soldiers fighting nearby in the same weather. The difference was not courage. It was boots, it was socks, it was discipline, it was command attention. It was supply reaching the last few yards. This was the American low point. A rich industrial nation had sent men into combat with shoes that could not protect them from the ground they were ordered to hold. But here the two stories begin to separate. The United States Army did something the German Army could no longer do at scale. It admitted the failure and redesigned the system around it. At the center of that change was the Quartermaster Corps, and one of its most important wartime organizers was Georges Doriot, a French-born Harvard Business School professor serving as an American officer. Doriot did not simply ask for a prettier boot. He helped bring management science, field testing, engineering, and industrial coordination into the business of keeping soldiers alive. The result was not one miracle item. It was an adaptive chain. The rough-out service shoe turned smooth leather inside out. The flesh side of the hide, worn outward, held waterproofing grease better than polished leather. The shoe used a stronger sole material, reinforced construction, and heavier stitching. It was ugly. It looked unfinished. It looked nothing like the shining military footwear of pre-war imagination. But it worked better in mud. Then came the M1943 combat service boot, known to soldiers as the double-buckle boot. It combined the service shoe with an attached leather cuff, eliminating the separate canvas legging that had been slow, awkward, and miserable in wet conditions. It did not solve everything. No boot solves a winter war by itself. But it showed the most important American advantage. A failed object could move from complaint to test to redesign to mass production to replacement issue while the war was still being fought. That is what the German soldier in the Ardennes could not see when he looked at an American boot. He saw leather, rubber, buckles, tread. What he could not see was the system behind it. A soldier's foot at the front was connected to American cattle hides, American tanneries, rubber programs, brass mills, railroads, ports, liberty ships, depots, truck convoys, repair shops, replacement schedules, and clerks who cared whether a man wore size 9D or size 11E. The boot was only the final inch of a supply line that stretched across an ocean. American abundance did not mean infinite comfort. It meant redundancy. A soldier could draw replacement footwear. Boots could be repaired. Worn-out pairs could be rebuilt. Different sizes and widths could be tracked. Mobile cobbler units could follow the armies. Rear area shops could return thousands of pairs to service. By the end of the war, the American repair network included hundreds of shoe repair shops across the theaters of operation. In liberated Rome, 2 American corporals and a small group of Italian cobblers reportedly repaired thousands of pairs a month. In the Pacific, mobile repair units returned huge quantities of footwear to service rather than throwing them away. None of that was heroic, in the way a battlefield charge looks heroic. It was better than heroic. It was repeatable. Behind the repair shops stood factories. Endicott Johnson in upstate New York became one of the giants of the story, producing footwear at an enormous wartime scale. Other American shoe companies joined the same effort. The Quartermaster Corps did not have to invent a footwear industry from nothing. The United States already had one. It had factories, workers, machines, leather supply, transportation, capital, and the ability to ration civilian shoes without leaving the civilian population barefoot. Germany rationed from scarcity. America rationed from surplus. That difference is hard to see in a photograph, but it is easy to feel in a foxhole. Still, the American system came close to another disaster in the winter of 1944. The Hurtgen Forest was not a place where equipment got forgiven. It was 50 square miles of dark, wet, broken woodland along the German border. Trees grew close together. Shells exploded in the canopy and sent steel and splintered wood downward. Mud filled the trails. Water pooled in foxholes. Cold settled into clothing and stayed there. American divisions went into those woods and came out ruined. Combat casualties were terrible. Non-battle casualties were terrible too. Trench foot and exposure pulled thousands of men from the line. Then, in December, the German Ardennes offensive broke open the Battle of the Bulge. Now the same American army that had learned from Italy found itself fighting in snow, confusion, cut roads, and positions where men could not remove their boots for days. Overshoes did not reach everyone. Shoe packs arrived late or in the wrong sizes. Rubber bottoms trapped sweat when socks and liners could not be changed. Some units had supplies behind them, but no safe way to get those supplies to the foxholes. The last mile failed. That phrase matters. The last mile. The American army could have warehouses full of socks, boots, liners, and overshoes. But if those supplies stopped at a road junction under shell fire, the man in the foxhole still froze. By January 1945, cold injuries had removed the equivalent strength of multiple divisions from American frontline formations. General George Patton warned his commanders that trench foot had become one of the most serious threats facing the Army. And in units where officers enforced foot inspections, sock changes, and drying routines, cold injury rates dropped sharply. The lesson was brutal but simple. A boot is not just issued. It must be used correctly, dried, inspected, rotated, replaced, carried forward, commanded all the way to the toes. The Americans paid for that lesson in pain, but they still had the material depth to apply it. The Germans did not. By late 1944, a German commander who knew his men's boots were failing could report the problem. That did not mean a solution existed. Factories had been bombed. Leather was short. Rubber was short. Fuel was short. Rail lines were broken. Allied aircraft hunted movement in daylight. Horses pulled much of the German supply system, and the horses themselves needed food Germany increasingly could not spare. The popular image of the German army as fully mechanized was never true. It had tanks and armored divisions, but the vast mass of the army marched on foot and depended heavily on horses. In November 1944, most German combat divisions were still not armored or motorized. A standard infantry division required thousands of horses, so the army, whose propaganda had sold speed, steel, and modernity, was still moving its daily life on hooves. Across the front, the American answer was truck columns. The Red Ball Express became the most famous of them. In late 1944, thousands of trucks hauled fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and equipment across France toward the advancing armies. Many of the drivers were African American soldiers serving in segregated units, denied full citizenship at home while doing indispensable work for victory abroad. They drove dangerous roads for punishing hours, often under blackout conditions, carrying the tonnage that made Allied movement possible. A boot on a soldier's foot could depend on a black truck driver keeping a convoy moving through darkness on a shattered French road. That is logistics, not a warehouse, a chain of people. And the chain affected morale in ways no officer could fully measure. A German soldier did not need to understand Allied gross domestic product to know something had changed. He could see it in American rations, in American trucks, in American wool, in American medical supplies, in American boots that still had tread after his own soles had cracked. For a soldier, morale is not only speeches and flags. Morale is the private knowledge that the system behind you still remembers you exist. A man who believes new boots are waiting somewhere behind the line fights Inside a different reality from a man who knows the pair on his feet is the last pair he may ever receive. The first man is tired. The second man is being abandoned one step at a time. This is why the boot question is larger than footwear. The German jackboot was in many ways a superior object in 1939. A better crafted boot, a stronger military symbol, a piece of equipment shaped by generations of marching armies. But it belonged to a war Germany could not actually fight to the end. It belonged to the imagined war, the fast war, the victorious war, the war of short campaigns, captured depots, and enemies collapsing on schedule. The American rough-out shoe and double-buckle boot were not glamorous. They were not perfect. They were part of a system that made mistakes, corrected some of them, and kept manufacturing. They belonged to the real war, the long war, the wet war, the winter war, the war where a soldier might wear out a pair, draw another, send the old pair to a repair shop, and keep walking. A country does not win a long industrial war because it makes the finest single object. It wins because it can make enough good objects, move them, repair them, replace them, and learn when they fail. Germany had the better legend. America had the better loop, complaint, redesign, production, shipping, issue, repair, replacement. Again, that loop was not cinematic. It did not fit neatly on a propaganda poster, but it reached the front. By the end, American footwear did more than supply American soldiers. Millions of worn but usable American boots and shoes were redistributed to liberated civilians across Western Europe and to freed prisoners who had come out of German camps with almost nothing. That is the final contrast. In 1944, German soldiers were taking American boots from bodies because their own army could not replace what war had consumed. In 1945, the American army had enough worn footwear left over to help shoe civilians in the countries it had liberated. One army could not reliably shoe its soldiers. The other could help shoe the people standing in the ruins behind it. That single fact explains more than a dozen speeches about production ever could. Because logistics, stripped down to the human level, is not an abstract science. It is the distance between a factory floor and a soldier's feet. One army kept closing that distance. The other watched it grow until men were searching the dead for something to walk in. So the dead German in the Ardennes, found with American overshoes, pulled over failing German boots, was not just a battlefield detail. He was evidence. Evidence that the war had passed beyond tactics, beyond courage, beyond the old sound of jackboots on stone. It had become a contest between systems. One system still had leather, rubber, trucks, repair shops, clerks, drivers, and factories working toward the same frozen foot. The other had symbols it could no longer sustain. Germany did not lose the war because of boots, but by the last winter, the boots showed the loss clearly. The Reich had built a military machine that frightened the world. Then the war became too long, too wide, too cold, and too material for that machine to feed itself. And at the broken end of the supply line, a soldier learned the truth without needing a map. His rifle could still fire. His orders could still arrive. His officers could still speak of victory. But his boots were coming apart, and no army marches farther than its feet.